Jan Jekielek is an award-winning journalist, author, and filmmaker who has worked at the Epoch Times for over 20 years. Today, he is the senior editor and host of the show American Thought Leaders, one of my personal favorites. Jan has written a very important book titled Kill to Order, which offers critical insights for the dangerous moment we find ourselves in right now. Jan, welcome.
Mikki, thank you for having me. This is wonderful.
Well, it's an honor, and it's kind of cool that the roles have reversed here, and I get to ask you questions for once here. And it's a really important time to do so because you've written a very important book, and I want to be fully transparent in saying that I have not had the time to read it, but it has caused quite a stir. There's a lot of hype about this book, and everyone I know is talking about it for good reason. And so I would love to take this opportunity to give you a spotlight to talk about why you wrote this book and why it's so critical in the moment we find ourselves in.
Well, it's an astonishing thing because I've been working on this issue of, this is kind of a murder for organs industry that's been happening in communist China for 20 years. We're talking large scale forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience. I kind of stumbled into this once the evidence hit me over the head, and I've been reporting on it basically for just over 20 years now. And it's been very hard to do, and there hasn't been a lot of interest, and there's been even international institutions that have basically ran cover for this, okay? And never mind that it's so unbelievable that a whole lot of people would just not want to go there when I would talk to them, right? And today, for a whole lot of reasons, and I think our COVID experience might have been part of that, probably a big part of that, people are wiser and they're ready to understand. And I've got this book on, one of the darkest things human beings can do to one another that's actually, number one in multiple categories on Amazon right now. And I kind of wanted to see if we can blow it out of the water and actually put a dent in this horrible kind of industry of death.
We got to really know each other after the release of my film, The Great Awakening, which used as a spotlight, kind of as a template to warn the world of how these collective communist regimes can psychologically corral millions of people into an ideology and thus a movement and thus an agenda that turns out to be very deadly. And it was kind of fascinating to me after The Great Awakening came out that I had a lot of pushback from people saying that, why are you focused at all on China? Why are you even mentioning China? That China's not the danger. They're doing great. And we should actually look at their systems of how well they operate. And I was kind of surprised because, well, we can certainly point towards, the way that they handle some of their infrastructure and the cleanliness of their cities. Sure, absolutely. They're doing a fantastic job there. But at the end of the day, it seems that where that regime is leading is a covert destruction of everything that is not that. And so you have been, and I will say that a lot of my research has come through the great work that you've done, the great work that Epoch Times have done to really understand the way that we've been infiltrated. There's a lot of concern right now about America being occupied and infiltrated from, foreign allies and adversaries. But it seems a turning away from the fact that we have so many spies, Chinese spies. They have secret police forces here in America. And they have been really running a game as far as stealing a lot of our technologies and working behind the scenes also to amplify and prolong and stimulate some of the conflicts that we're now witnessing. And I'd love to hear your view on how they're doing that.
Well, just if I can comment briefly, because you mentioned something incredibly important. When I first started looking at China human rights, I kind of got thrown into it in a curious way. There was this narrative, let's call it the Kissinger doctrine, because it was really Kissinger's kind of brainchild, okay? And the idea was that China is going to liberalize if we just pump enough cash into communist China, okay? And the thing is, I stepped into a situation where I saw basically prisoners of conscience, innocent religious believers, Falun Gong practitioners, and others basically being killed for their beliefs. They could sign a piece of paper, they could walk away, they would have to pledge their fealty to the party, renounce their beliefs, and agree to re-educate or transform, I hate that word, others. But that would be fine. You could go home. But if you didn't, they would work onto you, and sometimes unto death, right? All Falun Gong deaths would be considered suicides at this point. When I was kind of entering, this was the unwritten rule. So I knew deeply, right? And this, by the way, this was a 95-5 issue. Everybody believed it. Left, right, up, down, conservative, Republican, Democrat. Very few people saw what I did, which was that they were violating the thing that we enshrine as the major protection of from government, the First Amendment, right, in our Bill of Rights. It's the reason it's the first, because it's our freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of conscience, right, faith. And if you're killing people for exercising that, you're not liberalizing. Okay, and they haven't, and this is one of these kind of core subterfuges all along, right? That we've had to face. To answer your question, right, and this is kind of the punchline of the book. The Chinese Communist Party instrumentalizes absolutely everything. In Kill to Order, a part of the book, of course, is about this forced organ harvesting industry and how they instrumentalize bodies of people that they dehumanize and demonize, right? There's always a black class in communist China, the group that the regime is attacking and blaming all the woes of society on. And then they use these people in horrific ways, most recently in this forced organ harvesting situation. But what they also do is they instrumentalize, say, ostensibly nations that are supposed to be their allies, like Iran. Right? And so, of course, a lot of us have been thinking about Iran lately, right? So what has the Chinese Communist Party done? Well, number one, it's bought 90% of Iran's oil. It's basically fueled this regime. I mean, or the regime has fueled it, but it has fueled the regime with a lot of money, right? Through this shadow fleet that they basically use to evade sanctions and so forth. And it's used Iran as the tool to keep the American gaze focused on these Iranian proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas and so forth in the Middle East, and not focused on our greatest adversary. That's in the subtitle of my book, which is Communist China, as they insinuate themselves into the global economic structure, as they work to subvert America, as they buy the land, right beside military bases, as they do all of these things, as they subvert our institutions and kind of promote this general discord and, basically, ultimately civil war is what they've been trying to fuel here.
Now, with everything going on and so many people searching right now for answers, people are confused. They don't know who to trust. You're one of the few journalists in this world that I do trust. Great reason for that, because you've put out so much accurate information. And above that, I know you as a person, as a friend, and you're a good man who cares. You're an honest human being. And as everyone scrambles to try to find out what they can do, I've been on a lot of calls lately with hundreds or thousands of people, and one of the questions is what can we do to step up to help? We don't know what to do. I'm just a dad. I'm just a mom. I don't know how I can participate, because we recognize that there is something really dangerous happening here in our nation, and we feel that we're teetering on the edge of something. We don't exactly know what that is, but before we fall, what can we do? And so how is the information within your book, Kill to Order, how does that serve that question that people are asking, and what might it provide that will help people better guide their own lives and protect their families?
Well, so a key theme in this book is something like about the distinction between what we would call Hippocratic medicine and utilitarian bioethics on the other side. And the utilitarian bioethics is what we saw is the mentality that governed the COVID response, okay? So on the one side, Hippocratic medicine, you're trying to do the best for the individual. As a caregiver, I'm trying to do the best for you. And any intervention I might want to use, I try to minimize that harm for you. Essentially, I'm responsible for you to do the best for you as an individual human being, highlighting your individual dignity. Okay, the other side is this utilitarian model where we say the greatest good for the greatest number. Okay, and that's really, it's okay to sacrifice a few for the good of the many. The problem with this view is that someone decides, and nobody has perfect knowledge of how this system works. And of course, a few people actually end up being sacrificed in that situation. But what dawned on me as I was writing this book actually was, you've probably heard this maxim, right? In order to make an omelet, you have to break a few eggs. That's typically ascribed to Joseph Stalin. That was his explanation for why a lot of people are dying in communist Russia as part of the creating of the glorious, revolutionary utopia. And it just dawned on me that this is actually like the apotheosis. This is where utilitarianism goes, right? This is the idea. And so for us, I talked about how we had this engagement. We believed we were going to liberalize communist China. And by the way, I have a whole chapter in the book explaining how they make us complicit, right? Through creating these kind of financial relationships and so forth. We believe very deeply that we were going to change them. Of course, it helped that we were making money along the way, or at least some of us were, right? To not notice the problem with that belief. But actually it happened in the other direction, right? And they've been changing us, and that making us more utilitarian and ending up in a situation like, how bizarre was it, right? That we would, this COVID response was worse. I argue that if it was a random response, it would have been better than the actual policies that were implemented. I don't know what you would think about that, but it's just unbelievable, right? And so, but that comes from this cold utilitarianism, this idea that you can control everything, the totalitarian worldview, and we have to stop. We can't go in that direction. And understanding the CCP is central to this, because that is exactly how they think. But I don't think our policymakers, and frankly us as a whole, fully grasp the depths of depravity of the thinking, the cold thinking of this regime.
Well, you touched on something that's very dear to me, and that's why the third episode of the Pandemic series was really about collectivism. Because if you look at the way that they have corralled millions of people throughout history into doing, millions of good people into doing really horrific things, we're talking about hundreds of millions of people being murdered, and largely at the hands of their fellow citizens, of their friends, their neighbors, their families. How did Mao Zedong get millions of young people to literally turn on their own parents and their teachers through deep indoctrination? And this has happened forever, Bolshevik revolution and beyond. And so that is one of the most important things we can learn right now, because I still witness this online every single day of people attaching to a label, a side, a team, a tribe, and not understanding that they're actually under the control of what I call weaponized compassion. They have taken that compassion of ours, that innate human spirit of our love for life, and they've managed to kind of warp the thinking in such a way that we see other as dehumanized. That dehumanizing of other reaches such a point that we then feel justified in eliminating other nations and our neighbors. And that has been one of the most deadly destructive things, and history is proof of that. This is not an idea, this is not a conspiracy theory. We have numbers to prove that. And so I love that you've written a book that helps people understand that, because until we get through that, until we understand that we are cells in the organism of life itself, and as long as we continue to see each other as enemy, we will always be diseased, and we will be killing the very organism that sustains our lives.
Again, you're giving me shivers up my spine as you're talking, because this dehumanization aspect is so central to how the Chinese Communist Party operates. They create these what are called black classes, right? And then there's different groups. At the beginning, it was landowners, because they wanted to seize their land, right? To make it a, property-free society, right? Everything is collectively owned, except it's not really. It's the animals that are more equal than others, to use Animal Farm reference there, that actually control that. So you demonize these people, and then you can even kill them and take what they have. And there's been all these different classes throughout history. Falun Gong practitioners were the one in 1999 that they dehumanized in extreme ways, like really talking points straight out of 1930s Germany, that kind of thing, right? And as a result, they were able to grow. They incarcerated these people that were now dehumanized, and then these surgeons and transplant teams and all these people could actually manage to they knew people that are doing this, they understand that they're killing a living person. They're killing someone by extracting their organs, and they're doing this at mass scale. But that without that dehumanization piece, none of this would be possible.
Well, on that note, I'd like to invite everyone to go to killedtoorder.com. This is the name of the book, and it is a very important book for everyone to read right now, particularly in the moment that we're all in here together. And where else can people find your great work, Jan?
Well, you can find me on X at Jan Jekielek, if you can spell it. But it's we want to try to kind of create a movement with this. I truly never expected this book could be at the top of all these major lists. Like, maybe we can actually, get on the New York Times list, as much as both you and I have a bit of a dislike of this particular institution, because it pervades so much false information, and in many cases against us and the institutions that we work with. But what the effect of that will be, that millions more people will understand this issue and understand, what kind of evil is possible. We saw during COVID people being welded into their homes. I think that might be part of the reason why we're a bit wiser, right? I'm talking about in communist China, right? To achieve this zero COVID policy. This is the totalitarian mindset at work. I think we're wiser. I think we're ready to understand it, but this book actually helps you understand it in full. And I hope that our policymakers can really take this to heart and understand who we're really dealing with.
Jan, thank you for your great legacy of work. It is a true honor to call you friend. Get out there and buy that book, people. killedtoorder.com. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Listen, you're such a good man. I mean this. Like, I'm really touched by it. Yeah. Thank you.